Hello and welcome to today's Truth Proof. I'm Les from Digital Creations, bringing you Thursday night live stream. Great guest on tonight, as you probably read the banner. He's been on before, a prolific filmmaker and researcher and everything else to boot. But I'll let Paul introduce him as soon as I go through today's chat and see who's in today's chat. So let's have a look. We have the Midnight Golfer, Lisa Odd, Alison Buttles in tonight's chat. Welcome, Alison, to the show. Solent Rich, Simon Riley, and we have Stargazer Eternal. Now, as you've probably seen in the chat, Skyflower is doing our moderation tonight, so welcome to the show, Sky. Let's have a look. Twitchy Curtains is in, and we have Steve Tress. Welcome, Steve. Lee Roscoe, welcome as ever, Lee. I hope you enjoy it tonight. We have, going through, John Thomas, Aldo Rain, and did I say Ralph Winter? Nick's Exploration, welcome to the show. Nick, Mally Dodgson, always a great pleasure to see you in there, Mal. Okay, without too much further ado, I think we'll go to Paul and his guest. And as I say, welcome everybody to tonight's show.
Thank you very much, Les. Great. I'm happy to be speaking to Chris Turner tonight. Not just somebody we've got on live stream, but somebody I consider a good friend, and loads in common with the subject. Share similar values as well, so that's always good. Chris, welcome to Truth Proof.
Hey, mate. How you doing? Good to be here. Always great to catch up. Speak to Les as well.
Yeah, well, always, yeah. And as Les said, prolific filmmaker. I mean, you're busy all the time. I don't know if prolific is the word, but you turn a lot of work out, don't you? And it's your job full time, really. And what projects are you involved in?
Oh, what am I not involved in? It's well, you'll know. You just spent 3 years doing it.
Yeah.
So with the problem with this is that there's too few of us, and there's too many subjects and topics that we want to cover. So I tend up wanting to cover all the topics myself, which is ridiculous. It can't be done because as you sort of up the ante, so to speak, or you want to up the quality of the films and the research included in that, and you want to start working with various other researchers, and including now you're doing the same, you did the same with Wolflands, we want to start looking at including a little bit of science in there. I'm not necessarily one of those that is going to get bogged down by this credibility stick. I know in the past I've talked about it, and I think you're right, it is very important, but I think you'd probably agree with me that the witnesses are probably more important than the science aspect of that, because
ultimately, yeah.
I mean, I get the feeling that it doesn't really matter how many scientists we get on board. I mean, any scientist that wants to come on board that can help in any way, technical or other, is fantastic. But I think it's always going to come down to, especially for the people watching as well. Do you know? I find when I speak to people at these conferences and they'll come up to me and talk about the films and what we've done together in the past, it's always about the accounts. It's never about the science. It's yeah, that, and I'm the same. It's the encounters and those paranormal events and the sort of multi-phenomenal areas, or a term you coined, that everybody's interested in. And I think always have been. I think since the day of Keel, when he was talking about all this stuff, how it was all tied together, and Valet and all those guys that were working on Skinwalker before Skinwalker. I can't remember the name of the ranch now off the top of my head. Was it the Wilson Ranch? Was it called?
I bought it the Gorman Ranch at one point. I don't know, but regardless.
Yeah. Well, yeah, just that. I mean, I think they've been doing things in secret, but if you think about it, if you look at the TV show as an example, how far has a whole team of scientists got on Skinwalker? Now, yes, I would suggest that they've got much further than they're publicly saying, but they've been doing this a long, long time. They've been doing this 30, 40, 50 years. And in the scheme of things, on the surface, the public haven't really seen that much change. I don't know what you think.
Well, no, and I wonder. Well, let's not just stick with that location that you're on about, Skinwalker. I wonder if any big scientific advances were discovered, any big revelations were discovered, if we'd ever hear about it. You know, it's almost like the Grail, isn't it? You know, I mean, we're not we're not saying every light in the sky and every shadow that looks like it could be something other than a standard person is a cryptid or a true UFO in the truest sense of the word. But this stuff is real. And perhaps, I don't know, perhaps mainstream science, perhaps the most frightening thing about the subject for mainstream science is the fact that they know this, because the overwhelming amount of evidence out there, nothing to do with me, what everybody else has collected, the things that people have seen tell you that there's something real to the phenomena, and they can't solve it. They can't get their heads around it. It doesn't fit to our laws. It's an over science. It's over the top of science. And that's the word for it. It's over the top of it. And that's probably an hard pill to swallow if you think that you're the people with all the answers. And it might sound a bit arrogant from somebody like me with no scientific background whatsoever saying that, but I've spoken to hundreds and hundreds of people who've told me similar things with nothing to gain. And in many instances, they've seen what they're claiming to see. All right, then we can get other people that are going to jump in, Chris, and say, well, yeah, but it'll have a perfectly logical explanation, an earthbound explanation. We just haven't found it yet. Well, you know what? How far are we going to move the goalposts? How far are we going to move the goalposts from the explanations that we had for UFOs from the 50s to the 60s to the 70s? We're still seeing the same things, but the explanations have changed. We're no longer using weather balloons as a staple explanation for UFOs. We're finding other things to label these objects with. But science does have its place. I think anybody, and I'm a novice when it comes to making films. I mean, I've learned so much off you and Les as regards camera work. And do you know what I mean? So I'm not going to pretend that I know what I'm doing when it comes to being at the back of a camera half the time. I'm asking people, what settings should we be using? I'm the guy that gets the reports and goes out there, and I'm picking this camera work up as I'm just avid. I'm eating at it all the time. But I don't know. I think the science is an important factor. I've got not every week, not every month, but I've got a high-profile scientist liaising with me all the time, and this guy's still writing important papers for mainstream science, yet is liaising with somebody who's collecting reports from people who claim to have seen something akin to a werewolf, or claim to have seen occupants of some UFO that mainstream science couldn't possibly be here because it can't traverse all these billions upon billions of light years. Well, I'm sorry, people, but they're already here. Whatever it is here. I don't know how or where it's coming from.
Yeah, well, two interesting points there, mate. The first thing about the academic side of this is the ancients didn't need academics. And that's one thing in my work, because I do a lot with Zohard. I get a lot of different cases on my desk and edits that I have to work through, and accounts and historic accounts, and a lot of ancient mystery type stuff, the stuff Graham Hancock looks into, that kind of stuff. And yes, all right, there were the priests and the high priests who were privy to this sort of information, but they didn't necessarily have a scientific mind, if you like, just an inquisitive mind. And the other thing about the scientists as well is that the guys that are possibly now very interested in this researching out in the paranormal field, shall we say, we have to remember that in their fields, they have to work with a lot of restrictions, not least funding, because there's a lot of hoops they've got to jump through. Things have to be done in specific orders, or not done at all, not on a public, not for the public consumption anyway. Yeah. So it's I suppose they're used to, we get frustrated, and I would suggest that some of the scientists out there are equally frustrated in their own fields, because that's, there's quite a dogmatic approach in a lot of these scientific fields, and they're very heavily monitored, and the constraints are very tight and getting tighter daily, I would suggest. So, yeah, I mean, I can only see more and more scientists coming on board, and hopefully to to please that portion of the audience, because the audience is huge, isn't it? That's what I found, and this is just me talking about my films. I'm like you, and we Mick Park, and we conversed recently, didn't we, talking about how often we watch this type of documentary. Netflix is starting to sort of buy up this sort of content. Amazon are all over it, and there are other now platforms like Hulu and some of the smaller platforms, Blaze TV, which I had elusive heard on recently. They're very interested. I think those sections that they do on the paranormal and ghosts and UFOs, they must do very well, because they're very interested in this stuff. So it's never really gone away. I think trends come and go, don't they?
Why do you think then that it's not a sudden interest, but it's a resurgence, should we say, in the paranormal? Why have we got that? Do you think it's because people are bored and they're wanting a little bit of excitement and something that's a bit edgy, or do you actually think there's a change in public opinion about the phenomena itself, and people are sort of realizing that it's real? It's not Hammer House films. This is the things that people are reporting. There's some validity to what they're saying.
Yeah, I think pop culture has a huge part to play. It always has, but I also think that the social engineering that goes on and has always gone on, that plays a part too. I think there are topics and interests, shall we say, injected into the public arena. Sometimes it happens by happenstance, doesn't it? These things just catch fire. But you've got platforms, and I think in a strange sort of way, I think the youth have played a strange, probably unexpected part in the resurgence of this topic, because if you go onto TikTok, the young kids love it. They are all over this topic. Now, they might not necessarily, we don't see them on Facebook. It's not cool enough. Facebook's for old people like me and you. But like my daughter, who is on TikTok, she will regularly watch mysteries and paranormal ghosts things. It's absolute, TikTok's rife with that type of content, and I think that's just bled through into every house.
How much of what's out there, I know we don't know in a percentage, but what would you think that's out there is actually genuinely researched good content, and there's other stuff that's just for thrills, giggles and thrills?
Yeah, well, I think we have to understand that is always going to be the case. At the end of the day, the TV companies, ultimately, they're all businesses.
Yeah.
And that's what it's all about. It's all about the money. It's all about the viewers. And if you don't get the viewers, that show will go out of fashion real quick.
Do you have,
so,
I don't know whether you have, Chris, but I've turned quite a few documentaries that have made it to TV, on things like Blaze and that, down, simply because I know that they're not, what I wanted to portray is not going to be put out there in that manner. And I don't know whether I'm stupid for turning it down, or whether I need to stick to my principles. I'll continue to act like I am doing. But before we sort of touch on things like that, you spoke about Zohar. Is there any particular cases or bits of work that's come onto your desk that you've thought, wow, this one's a little bit more interesting than the others? I realise I'm just throwing things at you now in dark, but have you worked on anything recently or in past that's really sort of opened your eyes? Because I think people ought to realise that you're seeing things every day, cryptid related, UFO related, poltergeist activity, and you're working with this on a daily basis, 5 days a week, sometimes 6, aren't you, Chris?
Yeah, well, yeah, certainly 5 days a week, long days. But it's sort of all, I'm like you, it's all I do. I live and eat this stuff because I absolutely love it. And I get,
what is I'm sorry for butting in again, but is the bulk of it the same? But do we have any standouts?
I would say the stuff that I'm most interested in tends to come full circle because it's important. That's what I've found. There are cases that won't go away, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
And a lot of that ties into the ancient mystery. And I know Egypt is an old one, but there are a lot of myths and legends and that kind of thing that certainly from Egypt. Obviously, Egypt ties in throughout, is tied to all the religions as well. So there's that alchemistic angle there to look at. But I think it's all old favourites, really. That the Ark of the Covenant. I mean, obviously made famous by raiders, but there's a lot more to that account. And also, one of the other things that's very underreported is what's going on in India, the architecture and the ancient alien topic in India, and the manufacturing in some of those temples is certainly absolutely using advanced lathing techniques, using extreme heat on granite walls and carving out whole cities out of into granite and hard rock, which we can't do now. So I know that sounds a bit like a cliche, but those things, all that ancient mystery stuff, the alchemy and the paranormal aspect of the missing technology, the gods, it's all tied in, and it will keep going around. Again, like I said earlier, this is, you can go back to the 50s and 60s where this stuff just keeps coming around. It just keeps coming around again and again, and it's almost like it's coming around again to make us pay. That's how I feel. It's coming around again to make us pay attention to this stuff. There's something in the fine detail there that we are missing. Now, I certainly think and agree with you that the scientific mind, and the people like Graham Hancock and the people that he gets to work with, because even Graham, I would imagine, is coming across evidence and elements that he can't or won't discuss just yet because the time isn't right. I know Graham Hancock's got a huge interest in psychedelics. Now, I haven't watched the new series yet. I believe it's #1 on Netflix. So that just goes to show. I used to watch Graham Hancock stuff on BBC One. I think it was Horizon back in the 90s. And I think Graham Hancock fell out with the BBC at the time over something or other. I don't know exactly what that was, but it just goes to show that he has been along with many other researchers, just scraping away, just doing his thing, just going through the motions, and eventually, I would suggest that the audience now is very, very mainstream, where it would have only been quite a small niche on BBC Two, on Horizon, watching what he was up to. Now everybody's fascinated by this stuff. Joe Rogan, people like Graham Hancock and other researchers. Well, look at, I think, was it Travis Walton that was on Joe Rogan? So a lot of the highest views on Joe Rogan's podcast, which is the #1 in the world, feature paranormal subjects. So something's happening.
Yeah. You spoke about psychedelics. You touched on it then. And obviously, we've got ayahuasca, the spirit molecule that people like to term as the way to see the aliens. It's just like a doorway into this other realm, and I find it fascinating. I mean, I'm not promoting drugs, but I find it fascinating that this particular drug, this particular substance, be it synthetic or from the vine of the dead, I think that's where it comes from, doesn't it? That's what they call it, the ayahuasca. I find it fascinating that the experience that people have whilst using it is a deeply spiritual one, or one where they're meeting higher beings. And I can't get my head around that. I do believe that there must be transitioning. They must be meeting these higher beings in some way, shape, or form. Otherwise, the vast population, the people that use this substance, wouldn't be reporting this time and time and time again. And we touched last week on the incubus, the old hag, the people that have these dreams or in the dream state, why is it that they only see that? The sort of terrible shriveled up demon type being sat on their chest. It might sound like a rant and a ramble, but when you turn it over in your head and you go back hundreds of years with that particular story that people keep talking about, it's a similar thing that they're seeing all the time. I'm not asking you to give me an answer why, but I find that fascinating.
Yeah, I think plant medicine in general, and you can go back. The plants were used again by these high priests, weren't they? So maybe that's where the knowledge came from. You didn't need a scientific mind. You needed an inquiring mind. And I think today the individuals that go for those experiences, say, or even just do something a little less natural, like DMT, in places like Holland, for example. If you're obviously quite spiritually aware, or spiritually intelligent, if that's again the right word. And I'm like you. Sometimes you just can't find the words in this topic, and I think sometimes there just aren't words to describe a phenomena or feeling a sense. But I think I would agree with you that the plant medicine and these altered states of consciousness, it doesn't have to be achieved by using these plants, for example. I think if you look at what the ancients were doing, they were engineering devices or technology, ancient technology, into their architecture. And that's, if you look at places like Roslin, for example, the knowledge has been passed down, and this is all acoustic knowledge. These temples are carved in specific ways. There's the temples in Malta, for example. The Great Pyramid, the King's Chamber, is the same. That if you have a number of, if you repeat certain frequencies, like the Om, is the Om, is it Chinese or is it?
I don't know, Chris. I don't know. I mean,
like the Guru mantra, that's an Indian thing that it's all about tonality and frequency, and that would open up certain realities. So yeah, I think it's just forgotten knowledge, isn't it? I think we've all become, modern society has become, yes, in one sense more technical, but a hell of a lot less spiritual. And obviously, when I say spiritual, I don't mean religious, because those two things do not go together, exclusively. So yeah, that's why the ancient stuff is absolutely fascinating, and I would suggest that's why this lost, forgotten civilization did indeed exist. I think it did. I think people like Hancock are now proving that it did. And you've got people like Robert Bevall and many researchers, Robert Schoch, look at who were researching in Egypt, that knew all this, and another guy, Lloyd Pye. What a brilliant researcher Lloyd Pye was. And he delved into all areas of research. It wasn't just a lot of people know Lloyd Pye for his cryptid research, for the Sasquatch, the famous Sasquatch lecture that he did. But he knew and was aware of all this. So yeah, it's absolutely fascinating. And I think sorry, just I'll finish. I will stop rambling.
No,
I think by opening ourselves up to these different mediums and different areas of research, even down to, for example, the paranormal, the ghost stuff that I have no interest in at all. I do think there's something that can be learned from it. It might be the EVP side of it. I'm very interested in that. It's something that I'll be looking to do in the next film, because that again is another ancient form of communication. With whom or what? Well, that's another question.
Yeah. Well, do you know, it weren't so much EVP, but I spoke about it a few weeks ago, and the guy, Matt Rhodes, came on to Cliff Tops with us. I don't know if I told you. And spiritual mediums. I mean, Bob Brown, my friend, everybody, Bob, Les knows him, and a lot of people in chat will. He's really into spiritual mediums. I'm not so much, but Matt Rhodes turned out to be a spiritual medium. I didn't know that when he came to visit us. And he came with his sister, and I didn't, it's different surnames, she's obviously got married, and I didn't realise they were brother and sister. It was Jane that were coming to see us on cliff tops. When he said he were picking up on something, and I weren't humouring him. He's a really nice guy, but I said, well, what can you feel? What's there? And he went, there's somebody stood with me now. He said, he actually looks like somebody from Lord of the Rings. He said, it's that kind of dress. He said, he's got a piece of wood and he's got a blade and he's taking the middle out of it. And I says, can you ask him questions? Ask him what it's for. And he did. He said, it's to put over people's shoulders to hold them so they can't move their arms. But there's a place up, more importantly for this little bit of a story, there's a place on cliff tops which is pretty prolific for unexplained phenomena. Within the area of strangeness, this is a bit sort of bit where you'd get alt meat and good bits. And I said, do you want to have a walk up here with me and just see whether you can feel anything up here? And I didn't disbelieve him. I just didn't. I'd not sold on it. So he stood there in the darkness and he's sort of doing what he does. And he goes, there's a little being here. He said, and he's not human. He says, okay. So his hands are all bent and fingers are curled. He said, he doesn't like you. He says, he doesn't like anybody really. And if he's not got the energy, if he had, he would push you off the cliff. So he's saying this, excuse me. And then I became aware of a noise at the side of him. It was really strange. We're in pitch darkness. We've left Bob, Jane, and Jane's partner on a bird stand about 500 yards away. I said, can you hear that? He said, I can't hear anything. And I could hear it. And then 4 or 5 minutes went past, 10 minutes, I don't know. He's still talking about this being. And there was a noise. Now, we're at a bird sanctuary, people, but it's night time, but birds do fly at night, so that's what it could have been. But because I likened it to a bird flying up really close to your head overhead when you hear that. And I heard that noise. And just as I said, did you hear that? And he went, he's gone. It's really strange. Doesn't make what he claimed to be experiencing any more real. But it just seemed apt for the moment. You know, I found it fascinating. And then sticking with the psychedelics, just momentarily, then we'll move on. You know, whilst making Wolflands, I looked at loads and loads of things and lots of folklore, and I looked into the berserkers. And some people, some researchers would want you to steer you into the belief that these Viking warriors, these Norsemen, were turning into werewolves and bears. You know, that's why they were called the berserkers. But there's a strong possibility that were never happening, and they were using fly-agarics before they went into battle. You know, the red spotted mushroom that people have seen in fairy tales, and obviously that literally sent them into these rages, these sort of warlike rages. And one way that they were doing it to filter out the poisons, or it's been suggested, is they were feeding the fly-agarics to the deer, the reindeer, and then, sounds a bit crude, people, but collecting the urine, and it was filtered. The poisons had been filtered out, and then they were drinking it. So not everything, you know, when we talk about the berserkers and we talk about transformation and werewolves, not everything's entirely true, is it? I think there's a good possibility that these people were just using hallucinogenics and it were just sending them into some kind of deranged rage. But, you know, sort of moving on then, Chris, what plans have you got for films this year? Because me and Les are just bringing Wolflands to a close. It's gone to Mick Park now for music, and I know we're going to revive Supraliminal under a different name. But what's your thoughts on all this?
Well, I think I'm partway through a film with the Winter Hill team. So, you know, the Wit team, talking about the the enigma that is Winter Hill, which is it's not as strange as Bempton, but it has got quite a collection of very strange accounts, and again ticking a lot of boxes in the, you know, down from the Banshee Steve Meara saw down to, you know, Dogmen ripping bumpers off minis. So I mean that's an account we got just recently. A guy in the military, Mick McLaren, managed to find a witness, and she talked about a friend of hers who was in the military that wouldn't. We don't think he's going to appear, but he will give his account. So that will be in the film, and I think I don't know the exact, the bones of the account, but the encounter went something like this. I think he was sat in the car with his girlfriend or a friend of his in the region of Winter Hill up there in the evening, and as the lights came on, they could see the eye shine of this thing in front of the car. So I think this thing then stood up, and at that point, they started the car, tried to get out of there, and this thing's approached the car and attempted to rip. I think it actually did rip the bumper off the car. Now that's quite an encounter. I don't think I've ever heard an encounter where, other than the guy that we featured in Bringing Down the Light, with the Bigfoot, and it held him. Yeah,
that held
it held him by the calf, didn't it? If you remember.
Yeah.
But this is one of the few encounters, and it would be a Dogman account, wouldn't it? Because, I've said for a while now that these Dogman accounts do seem to be the accounts where the phenomena is coming up on the witness and not the other way around, like you get in the Bigfoot accounts. So it's quite a rare encounter that where one of these things would approach the, two individuals in a vehicle. So that would suggest that these things are not frightened, but at the same time, there are quite a number of Dogman encounters in the UK where these things are not really interested in any sort of contact with humans at all. They just want to get on the way.
Well, what level of intelligence do you attach to these things? Because they're clearly, as title of the film, the elusive. They're clearly very elusive. Is that their only attribute? Because for me, it's almost these things are fear feeders. They like creating the fear more than inflicting the damage. Although I suppose if people have gone missing and never been found, we don't know. But I still can't get my head around the fact that anybody that thinks that these things are living and breathing. People have claimed to have seen things like this on cliff tops at Bempton. There's nothing there. There's nothing there. It's sparse with trees. There is bits of woodland and stuff, but it couldn't contain these things. Don't mean that these people haven't seen what they're claiming to see, but there's something else. I mean, something paranormal, I believe, that they're coming through in these thin areas, but still not hearing any accounts of fatalities or attacks other than the feelings of extreme fear when these things are seen. Is that what they're about? I don't know. Is there some kind of universal law that because they're from somewhere else that they can't do that? I really don't know. Clutching at straws, but just throwing it out there. I hope we get some questions, capital letters, please, in chat, and just give us your views. UFO related as well. What do you think, Chris?
Yeah, I think you're right. I think there's a lot at play here. I think the frequency thing, I think the dimensional element of this, and I also think the astrological element of this can be tied into that. I think the ancients knew that in different parts of the world, in different parts of certain countries, and in different parts of counties, this thing back down to macrocosm, that all these elements do play a part in this, and I think the individual also plays a part in that.
Yeah.
And do you know the one account that sort of lends into what I'm saying here is Lee. Now, what are the chances, mate, of Lee contacting you and trying to get to the bottom of this? He's a brave guy and goes up there on his own in the first place, which I don't suggest anyone does, really. Up at Bempton. It's all right, obviously, in summertime because you get the late nights. Often people up there, but when it gets to the time of year, as you know, yes, the fishermen guys are there on the cliff. The cliff fishermen are there, but people are going up there on their own in the early hours, and
there's nobody up there at that hour, and you're only going to get the rock anglers up there, Chris, when tides are favourable. So. Sometimes if I put my car in that car park, it's only one there, and when I come back, it's still only car there. Do you know? And so go on, carry on with what you're saying.
When when Lee approached you and said, "Well, I'm going to come up and solve this mystery," in a nice way, he wasn't trying to be smart about it, obviously. And then you meet him up there, and you have probably, I don't know whether you would agree, isn't that probably your most sensational encounter up there, isn't it?
It was incredible. We were driving up Cliff Lane, and I've done this one. I mean, people in chat will be going, "Oh God, he's doing it again. He's talking about this one again." But it's worthy of it. We need to get Leon here at some point to tell us about it, because the guy's switched on. The guy's articulate. He knows what he saw, and he knows what's in the sky. More importantly, aircraft and everything, and he can't explain that. And his exact words as we're driving down is, "What? Come on, Paul, give us a breakdown. What do these lights look like?" And it was as quick as that, just like that. And they were there. And then over the course of that night, they appeared. I don't know. He got a diary. He was writing it down, I think 4 times. But there were one particular light in the field with us, and he likened it to the size of a Volkswagen Beetle. The circumference of this light, and it really was, and it was in the field with us. This thing weren't in sky. This weren't no misidentification of an aircraft coming towards you with its landing lights on.
Yeah,
this huge orange sphere that just literally just imploded and gone. But what were interesting, and we're talking to you, Chris, so I'll shut up in a minute. But what were interesting, that was November the 14th, 2019. 2 days before, there's cryptid sighting. November the 12th. We didn't get them both together. Me and Lee witnessed that. But I think it was after COVID, we bumped into a guy and we were talking to him, and he gave us that account. Are they connected? I don't know. They're connected by location. And that's why I think that there's something enabling the unexplained phenomena to present in these areas, rather than the, I might not be right, but rather than cryptids floating about in spheres of light. I just think that we're in an area where quite a few things can present at the same time,
Yeah, I think there are a lot of different elements affecting how and when the things present up there. That's my opinion on it, and I would suggest the military know this as well. Just talking about when you've seen the trucks up there, for example.
Yeah.
There seem not a pattern as such, but I would imagine that is tied into something that we're not privy to. I think it's probably something environmental.
They seem to be aware. They know when it's going to happen. For many times when me and Steve Ashbridge had been on the wolds, further inland, and we'd seen these spheres of light that were not as close as what me and Lee Hayward saw, but we knew they weren't aircraft. And it wouldn't be long, it'd be sort of, 10 minutes later that you'd get jet aircraft, fighter jets, low, screaming about over area. Now, I know you're going to get people saying, well, it was probably a military exercise, and that's military exercise over farms and not built up areas. We're on East Yorkshire wolds, but over farmland. It's not up in sort of remote parts that they're doing these things. But Chris, we'll just see whether Les has got any questions. Is that all right?
Yeah, sure.
Yes, thank you very much, gentlemen, and great show so far. Really, really enjoying it. I've got some questions from our chat viewers tonight, and I'm going to start off with Alison Buttle, and this one's a good one, Chris. Hi, Chris. Lovely to see you. What is the most interesting thing you've investigated, Chris? What's the most interesting thing?
Oh, you dropped that one on me. I would have to say, and I'm not just saying it because it's Paul, but there's a lot. I won't say a lot, but there's stuff Paul doesn't talk about well, the whole truth proof thing, the 5 books, the history of the house, Paul's history with Roslyn, the Sinclairs, the whole. I've never come across such a massive amount of just fascinating encounters. Just what happened in the house, Paul, just before you even started writing, all that stuff that happened in the house, the stuff that's happened with you personally, the
Yeah.
stuff that that encounter that you hate talking about, so I won't mention it. Again, this Rosalind thing, I know I keep badgering you to sort of look into it. Well, just recently we had someone at the office, a Templar, a Master Templar, I think he's called, and we're with Zohar doing a series about the Knights Templar, and all he talks about is the Sinclairs. That's all he talks about. So just like the lineage and your direct connection to the builder of Rosalind. And then the I mean, what, mate? Seriously, I mean, a lot of people probably are not aware, or may not even be aware. Maybe they're just fascinated by the books. Maybe they just love Bempton. But there's so much more to what you do than the cliffs or the cryptids. Do you know what I mean?
Without a doubt. Yeah, without a doubt.
Piles of it.
There literally is.
There's only one other guy that has that sort of stuff going on that I'm friends with, and he's another friend of mine, Ellis Taylor. His life is amazing. And I dare say there are quite a few people out there that are not either brave enough or maybe have no interest in it, and they have their own way of dealing with this, and they're not so inquisitive. Maybe they're just going with it.
Do you know, Chris, if I hadn't have packed in work at, like when I did, I probably never would have even wrote that first book. So I'd have been sat there with all this in my head, because when I was working, me and Steve Ashbridge, we were still going out on walls. I hadn't just appeared since 2015. We've still been doing this from 1990s through 2000s. We'd still be going places. We'd still be doing all that. But I wouldn't have written the books. By writing the books, it's sort of snowballed, and there's hundreds and hundreds of accounts. But, the Rosalind thing, just to sort of back up what you're saying, and, it meant nothing to me. It was Whitley Strieber. And he said to me, you need to check out your family tree, because there'll be tons of people called Sinclair who've got no lineage to Rosalind Chapel. And I think the guys who did family trees in this chat now, to be honest with you, it's Andy, but he's not named Andy. But give us a thumbs up if you are, mate, because he knows all about it. He did it for me. And as he's going back with family tree, he said he'd never gone back as far with a family tree. And it went right back to William St. Clair, the guy responsible for Rosalind Chapel. And he's apparently, and he sent me all the information, he's my 17th direct generational grandfather, which is incredible, really. And I didn't expect that. And I thought, well, Whitley's just saying something for a bit of sensationalism, because he's a great guy, by the way. So there's no disrespect there with Whitley, but he's a showman as well. He's an entertaining guy. And I thought that's why he'd said it. But I didn't humour him. I've got Andy, who was good with family trees, and I asked him to look at it, and he came up with that. But enough for me. Let's move back to Les and see if he's got another question. An hard one, please, Les.
Yes, Alison, I hope we got to answer your question there. And yeah, thanks for that question. Nickname, welcome to the show, Nickname. Where in the world would Chris like to investigate, past or present, if he could? If money was no object, time was no object, where would you like to go and investigate, Chris?
I think there's a few places. I really would like to go to any one of the Bigfoot hotspots, really, Sasquatch or Bigfoot, Canada or North America, or any of those places, really, and be out. I mean, because I've obviously done, when I was making Elusive, the first one, I did quite a bit of wild camping, solo camping. And here, although you're alone, probably similar to the cliff tops, yes, you're alone and it's scary. But out there, when you're alone out there, you're alone. And you're in the middle, absolutely nowhere. And it's people like, I know you're talking about getting Ron Moorhead on, aren't you?
Yeah.
This Sierra Sound guys, and Ron seems like a really nice guy. But, just what Ron captured that night. I mean, it's absolutely incredible, isn't it? So, and this also is a very interesting, and it's a conversation you guys talk about this every week when you're doing the show, and that is are these things flesh and blood? Well, with Sasquatch and Bigfoot, obviously there's a massive split down the camp. But I've said it before, those places like Canada, North America, and Alaska, all those places, their places were something. I actually do think something flesh and blood exists out there, because they can certainly support it. And there are places that no one has ever stepped foot in, nor will they ever step foot in. And that, I think these beings frequent these places because they're not there, because we're not very nice. That's the bottom line. Same with the UFO and the oceans. There's so much of it that we have. But yeah, I think of all the things, I just like to go and have the experience of being out there for a week, just under the stars and in and amongst it, really, with seasoned researchers and guns.
Yeah, and guns, yeah. Do you know that? As you
Not
were
for the
saying,
Sasquatch, by the way. Not the guns for the Sasquatch, but
for the bears.
Well, and mountain lions and all the rest of it, yeah.
Yeah. But
and wrong turn.
And what? Sorry.
And Wrong Turn, if you've seen that film.
Oh yeah, I have actually.
It's a bit like Deliverance. You might need a gun for that as well, but there you go.
Yeah, and a strong belt on your trousers, but we'll not go there. But yeah, it's an interesting one. And where would you go? Yeah, somewhere like that. I would love to. You never know, Chris. We might end up doing it. Take Les with us as well, because you had an experience in that ravine, Les, didn't you?
Oh yes, I'm well versed to climbing up steep ravine, climbing out of steep ravines.
I spoke about this other day, and I'll just briefly touch on it. I know Les won't mind, but this is what he went the extra mile in Wolflands, Les, and we ended up going down an 800-foot ravine, and on the way up laden with equipment, Les is saying I don't feel very well, and he actually collapsed at top. His only regret is we didn't film it, innit, Les? Because we'd have had a bit of drama for film, but it was that serious. We've got two witnesses with us. There were Chris Wright and Les, and we were looking at Les laid on his back, and we thought he were going to die. And we literally did. He were out. But no, Les, full credit to you. You put yourself in them positions, and that's what Chris is doing, and that's what I'm doing, and I think that's the extra mile for documentaries. You're actually giving witness your full attention. You're not just talking to them over a coffee in a cafe and then having some flashback that's been reconstructed in a studio. Of this thing coming to a window. We've actually been there, feet on ground. You've done that, Les, and Chris does it. I think it's admirable. Anyway, enough of that. Let's go to another question, Les.
Okay, well, yes. Thanks for reminding me of that occasion.
Not like
Paul,
that, but
Yeah, and just to finish, why I collapsed on that one is that I dehydrated, and one little sip of water, because that's all we had left in the bottle. You would think 2 minutes later nothing had ever happened to me. I was jogging down that logging road back to the cars.
No, you weren't. And water ran down the side of your face when we get it here at first. But yeah, you did come round and it were okay. That's the main thing.
So there we go then. Right, okay, I've got a question from Lee Roscoe. And I know you've touched on this earlier, Chris. Why has Chris upgraded his camera equipment? And what are your plans for 2023? I know you touched on this earlier, didn't you?
Yeah, well, I think we're going to talk about plans for 2023. Well, obviously, Lee's one of the guys. Lee Roscoe's one of the Winter Hill investigation team members, and he's helping me make this film on Winter Hill. And there's a lot, with any film, there's always a lot to do. And we're finding at the minute that the witnesses are quite tricky to sort of pin down. They're all, and every credit to them, because I've never been in that situation where I've had to sort of burn my soul to a stranger about a strange encounter that I've had. So I think they've probably got a taste of it now, how frustrating it can be when you're trying to meet a witness and such things just get in the way. It can be the weather, it can be the backing out, they're busy, they might have second thoughts about it. And I mean, you never really know, but yeah, it's tricky. It's tricky. I mean, the upgrade of the equipment is simply because what I do next, I'm trying to go a little bit mainstream with it. So a little bit of change of pace. Obviously, networks require certain equipment. Les will know this. He shoots on higher end cameras. So yeah, it's one of the elements of filmmaking that's frustrating, because it can get cameras are expensive anyway. You know, for the most part, a lot of this stuff can be done on a very good iPhone. But if you're trying to just up the ante a little bit, it can start getting pretty expensive, which then means things get delayed a little bit until you've got everything together. So yeah, it's a learning curve. A lot of it's a financial curve as well. So yeah, that's what I'm up to next. But at least next thing I do will look nice. You know, because do you know what? I just want to touch on this. I don't know whether you guys are going to encounter Wolflands, but off the back of Elusive, when it aired on Blaze TV, I got a few emails off people saying nice things, and I got the odd message saying this film was ridiculous. It needed more investigation. Why didn't he go out there and do night investigations? And that's probably my fault that I didn't say in the film. But the number in 2 years, can you imagine the number? Just think how many times you guys have been out. The number of times you're actually out there, nothing happens. And as a filmmaker and an editor, I can't justify putting me walking around the woods in night vision in the film and introducing a boo moment or a scare moment like they do on TV. Maybe that's a fault of mine.
Yeah, well, it's not a fault of yours, Chris, is it? But I mean, I didn't realise till I started getting involved with Wolflands. Initially, we're so preliminal and bringing down the light, but then Wolflands, because that became a monster in itself for me and Les working with. But I didn't realise how many factors there are, how many things that are at play that you, like you said, you've gained criticism for not doing the boots on the ground research, but you were doing it. But how many things do you add to justify what you were doing? You can't, can you? You can't please everybody.
Well, you want to please the audience, and I think it's something I will keep in mind. I think for whatever I do next. And I'm the same when I watch a lot of the guys from America that do the Sasquatch films, the Small Town Monsters guys. I do like watching them, you know, on the ground. But there's only so much of it you can watch where nothing happens. Yeah. And you know, it's one of my pet hates when people start introducing those little scare moments and the dramatic music comes in when nothing happened. A twig, a branch fell, or someone tripped over, most likely. You know, there was a boulder and someone moved it. It's not a footprint. You know, the whole stick structure thing, all that kind of thing. Yeah, I could have milked these elements. I could have really milked it dry. But at that time, I was more doing it. I was probably doing it for myself. Now I'm aware of the elements of. There is an element of entertainment with this, and it's something. Entertainment doesn't mean fake or hoax. It just means giving the audience a little bit more of what they want. And I see a lot of YouTubers get flack. You know, why have you put background music? People like Ben from 401, or you've put some background music in. Well, so what?
Yeah,
you know, the audience like it. You know, 95% of the audience like it, 5% don't, and that's the sort of nature of this stuff. As you say, you can't please everyone, but we do try. We do try.
Yeah, we definitely try. We've got to do. I mean, I've been stood in a pool of water in Danes Dyke this morning till just before 1 o'clock. Like, we have finished Wolflands, people, but we've seen potential for a cutaway. I'll not go into detail what it is, but it involved me doing a bit of artwork. Nothing. I've not defaced anything before anybody says I have. But you know, so everything's left as I found it. But it took me 3 hours, and took me 10 minutes to film. And that's the nature of it. But people don't see that part. But it's not a dig anyway. We're doing it because we love it. We're doing it because we've got a passion for the subject. But let's see whether Les has got any more questions, or are we wrapped up with them, Les?
I might be able to squeeze a couple more in, guys. Robbie Green, welcome to the show, Robbie. And by the way, I've just got to say at this juncture, if you are a first-time viewer, listener, then I'm glad you made it, first thing. And I hope you're enjoying the show and the conversation. So I'll carry on with Robbie Green's question. Well, I don't know what Robbie Green is alluding to, because the question just says, why don't you try it, Paul? So I'm
Oh,
sorry,
no,
Sky. Yeah, I don't know what that's alluding to.
I think we were on about
Plants.
Vine of the Dead, ayahuasca, and DMT, and so obviously I'm pretty sure that's what it alluded to. Would I try it? Wait, right, sir. I've never been an advocate of using drugs, but under right circumstances and with right people, yeah, I probably would, because I want to experience what these people claim to have experienced. See, I want to have the experience. So if the right circumstances came up, I might do. Yeah. Am I bad for saying that? I don't know. I'm not bothered if I am. So go on, Les.
Yeah, I'll get one question in, and it's from Far Past Midnight Paranormal South. Now, that's a bit of a mouthful, but welcome to the show, and thanks for the question. Chris Turner, when are you planning your next Last Transmission episode?
That's a good question. I'm going to have to find the time for it. I mean, I can find the time, but it's a bit like me finding the time to play the piano, and me finding the time to compose my own music, and me finding the time to film 3 films at once, and all those things. I mean, I do like doing the Last Transmission. You know, it's not. I will, but it's not the end of the Last Transmission. I don't know, mate, is the honest answer. I will try and find time, because there's a few people asking me about it, and I think the more of these podcasts that go out there, the better, really. So it just gives me a chance to get fresh faces on as well,
Yeah, just before we go to the next question, because it's just prompted me that Don emailed me this evening to say that Erica Lukes is doing her last broadcast, I think tonight, or her last show in the next few days. So, she's been a great advocate and a great person for the subject. So I don't suppose she'll be dropping out of it, but yeah, I wish her well. And just thought I would drop that in. Anybody's ever watched Erica Lukes and talking to paranormal investigators and people interested in Explained will know all what about a show. Will know what a show's all about. So go on, Les.
Okay, I've got a question from Andy Ross, a ghost whisperer. Could these dogmen be guardians of the areas that they inhabit, I guess, is the question.
Chris, I don't know what your views are on that. I don't know.
Yeah, I think it's a valid point. I think if you look into ancient folklore, and I think it's one of the things that people talk about. I don't know enough about it to comment on the ins and outs of it, but I think there's possibly something in it.
I think there definitely is, but I don't know. Like you just said, I don't know. I think what I do know has been left by ancient people, ancient civilizations, and ancient people. So we haven't found that much out since what they've found, have we?
Well, there's been a deliberate attempt to bury this stuff. I think that's what we have to acknowledge here. There are people and groups that don't want this knowledge out there. Not for the everyday person anyway. Generally you have to be a member of some sort of fraternity or secret society. And when I say secret society, I don't mean something conspiratorial. I just mean a group that operates out of public view. It might be a small group. It might be 3 individuals. It might, there's a lot of. It might be a bunch of pagans. It could be a bunch of Wicca. Who knows? There's a lot of this stuff, this knowledge. It's all the same to a degree. We're talking about the same. A lot of the time, we're talking about the same phenomena, aren't we? It's like take Pierre Sabaki. A lot of these, whoever these groups are, these entities, some of them, Jane the Fair, as he says, they've deconstructed reality. They know exactly how to traverse the dimensions, if you will, if that's what we're talking about. And it's just something that at the moment, yes, the ancients understood that, but we don't necessarily know how to do that. And back to the plants, it's one of the reasons that knowledge is being sucked and taken out of society and deemed dangerous. And I dare say in the wrong hands, it can be. But, ultimately, this sort of knowledge and these plants were given to the world by nature at the end of the day. And I would trust that over anything else.
Yeah, but the knowledge, like you're talking about the knowledge of the ancients, and we've not really advanced much further. in all of these years. Who gave them that knowledge? Because, like we said earlier, they weren't scientists. In grand scheme of things, the science that man's looking at today would have seemed like magic to to those people. So who gave them the knowledge?
Yeah, I think you're right. I think. Look, I'm a huge Ancient Astronaut, Ancient Aliens fan. So yeah, and I would absolutely. I'm almost, I'm as certain as I can be that those events happened, and there are numerous groups across the world going under the same name, and I think I would guess that's where the knowledge came from, and it might not necessarily have been direct contact. Look at Tesla. He was channeling from somewhere, something from somewhere, and a lot of these geniuses were doing the same thing. Channeling is just a word; it's just a term I'm using now. There are various words to explain where these geniuses acquire their knowledge from, and it isn't from reading a book. Sometimes it is from reading a book, but it's a book that's in the Vatican Library, and a book we're not our eyes will never see. So
sometimes listening to people speak, Chris, and reading interesting bits of information are the ingredients to create or give birth to even better pieces of information. It just takes the right person to sort of, read these things, listen to these things, and suddenly come up with the ideas. I mean, but who do you think, we'll see if there's another question in a minute, but who do you think's made any great breakthroughs within subjects of unexplained phenomena in recent years?
Recent years, I think it depends how you look at it. I think if in the terms of like ufology, I think progress has been made, but it's not necessarily new. It's just new in the ufological sphere. This stuff about the we talked about this before, the Tic Tac stuff. It's all that's just nonsense. That's just stuff to facilitate something else. But yeah, I think in research-wise, those guys we talked about earlier, like Hal Puthoff and Jacques Vallée and all those guys that were frequenting the Wilson Ranch and places before that, they were involved in the Stargate project, remote viewing projects, all that stuff. These are the people that have probably sort of helped get this knowledge in the public sphere. But I think recently there are a lot of authors. I mean, we talked about Graham Hancock, and he's had a lot of help in what he does. He has done a lot of work, but before, he would reference the researchers, John Anton West and all those Egyptologists there that were doing that work. And more recently, a guy that I'm working with at the moment, Pierre Sabac. Pierre Sabac's book, I've said it before, it's absolutely mind-blowing, really, when you get down to the bones of it, what he's actually saying about these ancient gods, about where they're from.
Holographic culture?
Holographic culture, yeah. And I talked about it before. Look, it's a difficult book to read, but I'm making a series with him. It's one of the things we're working on now. We're doing the pilot at the moment, and we're going to simplify the book and break it down so people can consume that a little bit easier in bite-sized chunks and explain really the work he's done. I think people are going to be blown away by it, and he is now starting to get acknowledged by known researchers, like really popular researchers. And I think once he's finished what he's doing, I think Pierre Sabac could be one of those names that we're talking about in 10 or 15 years as a pioneer.
He's a brilliant individual. He's a really nice guy as well. I've spent quite a bit of time in his company over the last 3 or 4 years. And you're right, we're going to have him on the live stream, and I hope he'll smile when I say this, and I mean myself in this as well. If he's going to talk on the live stream, he's got to talk in more simplified terms, because the guy's so switched on. His knowledge is absolutely on point.
He can, the good thing about Pierre is that you can. I was recently on his podcast, and you can push him down any road you want to, and he can talk about anything. He can talk about any topic, and he's got something to say. And I know he's recently, I think he's just finished a book on the fair,
Yeah.
So that is interesting. That off the back of a book on scaphology, we'll call it, ancient extraterrestrials or ultra-terrestrials, however you want to term that, those that have deconstructed reality. Now his next book is The Fair. That's no coincidence.
The Hidden Kingdom.
Yeah.
Fabulous title as well.
Absolutely,
so, yeah, people interested in PS are back. Have a look. So, go on, Les. Another question, please.
Yeah, well, at this juncture, I'm going to throw a wildcard question in. This comes from myself, Chris. So you touched earlier on about Egyptian people, and I'm thinking, where do giants, where they've discovered giants? I know a lot of people, a lot of researchers have uncovered giant tombs, excavations around the world. Where do you think these giants fit into history, Chris?
There's a lot you can talk about there. The obvious one is the Nephilim, isn't it? That's the obvious one that a lot of Bigfoot and Sasquatch researchers jump to. That the Sasquatch is Nephilim, and it's offspring of the gods, and mixing with ancient humans, for example, or one of. God, I think people like Jim Vieira, for example, and stuff that look at the serpent mounds in North America, for example, where Jim Vieira's found the giants, buried giants and remains of giants. The Smithsonian's got remains of giants, hasn't it? Glastonbury, there's a 9-foot giant buried in the abbey. So it is there. This information is there. You just need the inclination to look.
Yeah.
And there's still, of course, this stuff's still being denied. Now, I think there was and still is in parts of the world, remote parts of the world, a race of what we would call giants. I mean, that's down to whether that's genetic or whether it's down to the atmospheric conditions. Maybe there's more gravity. How often have we heard stories about giant trees, for example? Trees of just epic proportions, enormous trees that we couldn't even imagine. Because everything with is it more oxygen? Everything would have been with
the redwoods. They're absolutely enormous, hundreds and hundreds of feet tall, aren't they?
Yeah, and is it less gravity as well? I'm not sure about that. Again, there's so much to unpack. But again, giants is just absolutely fascinating. They had a couple of guys, didn't they, at the Awakening? Hugh Newman, Andrew Collins, Jim Vieira. Those are the guys that that can really converse about this properly.
Yeah.
And I guess it's probably because a lot of this information is subdued under the radar, and nobody wants to talk about it in the mainstream. Is that we can't link the dots up, Chris?
Yeah, well, of course. Again, look, all this stuff, it's all tied in to certain religious factions and other factions that didn't want this information out there, and it's the age-old control thing. Yeah, I know. I do pipe on about that quite a bit, but even down to the Green Man in Britain, that a lot of that information, and Paul's probably across it, you and Paul probably come across it in Wolf. We're looking at the tribe and the remains that were found up at Flixton. A lot of that knowledge has been lost, and it's been lost through certain people not wanting that information out there, and some not deliberate as well, not so deliberate, because a lot of things happened, with the world 10, 12,000 years ago, didn't it? So there's a lot of disasters that helped shape the way the world is now, and hopefully that's not about to happen anytime soon. It's happen again, no doubt.
I don't know who it were that said earlier. It was Andrew. I think it might have been Andrew Ross, about the places where these things are seen and seem to frequent, and you touched on it, Chris. But then I got thinking about it, and I said, well, I haven't really got much to say about it. But I have a little bit, because a lot of these reports come from places where there's burial mounds and ancient earthworks. And one of our witnesses in Wolflands, Jimmy, I can see him on film just saying it, and he's saying, I think we were in its place. I think this, we stood in this ravine side of the River Derwent, 2 in the morning, I was sat, and he's saying, I think this is its place. We were unfortunate enough to come across it in its place, and maybe hundreds of years ago, thousands of years ago, people would have inhabited this place. And he's right, you know, because there's the remnants of the past all around you with cairns and burial mounds. It's all there, you know, but the place gets so little footfall. Nobody ever goes into it in night anyway, certainly.
Yeah, also, I mean, back to the giants and other even ET, if you want to call it that, or terrestrial. The inner earth, it's another subject that absolutely fascinates me, because it's tied into the reptilian thing when I was looking into that years ago. The inner earth is, it's like the oceans. It's just not explored. Now, mainstream science would have you believe that there's nothing in there. Now, utter nonsense. How many mythologies are there out there, cultural stories about this stuff in every part of the globe about ancient giants that reside in the earth, the ant people that reside in the earth. You know, there's various groups that reside in the earth. Well, I thought there was no room in the earth. So it's not just one group in the earth. I think when these pole shifts happened, humanity and those that were on the earth at that time went to wherever they could survive, and some of that would have been in the inner earth. I mean, I don't know how much of the Admiral Byrd story's true. I think there's quite a bit in there that's not true, but I think the story itself of what Byrd saw, I believe it personally.
And yeah, there is something to it, and I missed a trick, you know, because one of his close relatives contacted me years ago and they've got a lot of information, and I never followed it up. Yeah, what a fool. Really, I don't know, I probably heavily invested in other things and just never followed it up, but there you go. But okay, Les, with more questions?
Yeah, Mick Park comes in with just a comment, really. Yeah, hi guys. The other NIDS location you spoke about was at the Mount Wilson Ranch. I think you did pick up on it later on, Chris, as well. So, thanks.
Yeah, well,
for
that was thanks to Mick. So cheers, Mick, for that. Yeah, brilliant. If I've not seen that, there is I think it's like a 2-hour little documentary about a guy who goes out there researching at this place where the likes of Puthoff and Jacques Vallée were there doing their experimentation out there back in years ago before Skinwalker. And that suggests to me that this sort of stuff's going on everywhere. I think. I mean, are these areas of scientific importance that are popping up everywhere, including Britain? Is that what's going on? Maybe. I think some of it's ecological, obviously, probably the majority of it is. But I think there are certain locations, mostly those frequented by military bases, because as we've talked about before, that's not a coincidence that these bases are in these geographical locations. That's what the NIDS team were probably looking at. The likes of Barry Fitzgerald and Steve Mera have talked about this Project Doorway and magnetic regions and all that. Yeah, it all ties in, but it really needs someone or a team. And I know there are teams out there that actually meet think tanks out there that discuss this in a lot more depth than I'm trying to do, fumbling around trying to find the right words. But yeah.
There are. I know you know that, and I do myself. But these areas, and it's strange because I know Steve and Barry have touched on these magnetic anomalies, and we've got the magnetic anomaly in area that we're looking into. You know, the negative magnetic anomaly, and I've found out now it goes all the way up the coast and along the forests of North Yorkshire towards Fylingdales, which is interesting. And once again, military base, Fylingdales, very close to where a lot of activity we've filmed and people we spoke to in Wolflands. You know, it's all close to Fylingdales, a lot of it. Then we've got the former area of Bempton. Do you know, Chris, if I were going to, Bempton features all the time. And people think, Christ, it's a sleepy little village. But when you go on the edge of them cliffs, as you said earlier, there's nothing there. But if I were going to invest research, when somebody said to you, where would you like to go to do some serious research, or where would you? Yes, Bigfooting somewhere overseas, but in this country, Speedon.
Yeah.
If I could get access to somewhere where I could work on them cliff tops all the time, because it gets so little footfall. You can only get to the beach from Reeton, and then when you get there, the cliffs. When you get to Speeton, it's 400-foot cliffs. If you come down from the village of Speeton, you've got to come down a 400-foot ravine. It gets so little footfall. Yet those truth-proof books have collected a load of accounts, and from where? Speeton.
Yeah.
So it makes you realise that there's a lot of things happen in that area, probably more so than Bempton. It's only a mile away, 3/4 of a mile perhaps, along the same cliff top path. But Speeton that's the place that I would love to spend time there. It's just that's so inaccessible to park your car up there and go. You've got a 45-minute walk till you get to the location. And doing that on a night, it's just laborious. But there you go, rambling again. So,
there's two of us.
Right then, thanks for that, guys. Can I just come in with Lee Roscoe has just sent us a super chat, Paul, and great show as always, and a genuine guest is Chris Turner.
Well, we do.
You've got one fan, Chris.
I know it's not my wife, is it? Nah, it's probably not. I know.
You talked about Project Doorway. Do you want to? I know it's Steve and Barry's research, but I mean, you work with Steve. Probably you see him most days at week. What's Project Doorway for people that don't know?
I think Project Doorway is a lot of things, but predominantly, I think Steve and Barry Fitzgerald were looking into positive and negative magnetic regions across the globe, and they started investigating a number of not only events like UFO sightings, for example, Bigfoot, even down to suicides, murders, the effects that these magnetic regions, both positive and negative, have on everything, not just human beings, but have on phenomena, and then you tie into that then something that I was looking at recently that Mike Barrow was talking about with NASA, that where the Earth is in its cycle as well has an effect on everything else. So when you talk about patterns, that's the sort of thing that Steve and Barry and probably all these guys that are looking into this, we're all looking for that pattern. And it will be tied in to a number of elements, some of which we know about, which could be astronomical alignments, weather phenomena, ley lines, that kind of thing, and other things like, for example, consciousness. Because I think that's another part of this, that it's a word that's just a throwaway word, isn't it? Consciousness. It's very trendy at the moment. But in different parts of the world, there are very different types of consciousness, aren't there? In the Western world, you've got one type of consciousness, and I suppose we're quite tech savvy and very away from nature. In some respects, we're a little bit, ungrateful, unappreciative of what we got, and in certain parts of the world, they're not. They're more respectful in nature, and I think that maybe that's why in these locations, in some of these ancient, more sophisticated parts of the phenomena appears there more readily and is hesitant about appearing. And maybe I think that's probably one of the many things. And again, I think that's one of the reasons we all get frustrated that we don't know. And I don't think it's as easy as, I just don't think it's something that you're meant to know. You're not meant to know everything. I think that's one of the things. That's what I'm trying to say. We're not meant to know everything. There are a lot of elements to this. And maybe that's the reason that it needs a number of people to come together and take humanity to the next level, because that's really what it's about. I think behind the scenes, in terms of human evolution, in terms of technology, for example, there are things out there we can't even dream about that are just not for public consumption, that have been investigated and that are being funded by private corporations, black projects, all these things, the new military planes. And I talk about, Paul, a few shows, and this comes up quite often from the audience about, these planes, for example, must be ET, because we don't have tech that can do that. I think I tend to disagree with that. I think we've got, just looking at the old stealth fighter, that was on missions long before, and it was taking part in bombing runs, and you name it. It was doing all sorts of stuff.
But
spying, for example.
Obviously, that were an high altitude plane, and it would have probably made a lot of noise. I mean, I'm not saying you're wrong here, but when I look at these,
that was often misidentified.
Yeah, when you look at the triangles,
yeah,
and you look at the decades where they were seen, and even John Hansen, he's got some from early 1900s reports of the triangles, and you think that can't. I think personally, a lot of that can't be man-made technology when you've got people describing things as big as football fields. I mean, it could be a bit of an over-exaggeration, but huge objects. If we take the one at Hunmanby, and not talking about the Hunmanby incident, at a farm in Hunmanby where the guy and his father and the son looked up and they saw this huge boomerang-shaped thing, not far above rooftops, absolutely huge, graphite grey in colour, just hung there silent, and just slowly then just disappeared from view. That switched that guy on so much that he's got a mattress in a trailer, and that trailer comes out, and when on star-filled nights, and I don't mean every night, but he just lays, he's wanting to see it again. Incredible. I've written about it in book 2, so it's, and I've probably put who they are and that, because I did have permission and he did me some drawings, but I don't need to say it here. But, the tech savvy people, the technology, Chris, in many instances, I think it's suppressing people linking with the phenomena as well. And that might be why in these remote places, when you're devoid of like jump back to Wolflands, a lot of these places, there's no phone signal, there's no contact with technology. It's just devoid of everything, and it grounds you with nature. It grounds you with the world, and you're more aware and in tune with what's happening around you. That could be some of the reasons that these things are seen in remote places, or seen in places when everything's at 3 in the morning and not when world's buzzing. Do you know? I don't know.
I totally agree with you. I think all relevant points. I think that with a triangle thing, I think certainly now, whatever these groups are, whether they're interdimensional travelers or extraterrestrial travelers, I think whatever tech they have, we have now. So, and I think we've had it since, I think we've had it probably easily 50 years, I would have said.
Yeah.
That's my estimation, if not more. If you, I mean, we can't say his name, but if you look at what certain leaders were looking into back in the 1990, 1920 and beyond, after that, and actually some before that, the technology they were looking into dealing with, some of it ancient as well. If you the German guy went on huge quest to search the globe for this technology, and that technology wasn't. I think it may have been part of an ancient, forgotten, lost civilization, which is what Hancock thinks. But before them, it was from somewhere else. So I think it's everything, mate. I think you're right. I think some of it will be theirs. Hence the military presence up, certainly at Speeton, Bempton, and Flamborough up there. They're all, the F-15s are there, aren't they, chasing these lights.
Well, yeah. So, before Les might have a few questions for us at the end here. I think you just let me know if you have, Les. But before we sort of move to the film work that you're planning on doing and a few images, tell people your visit up there that night with Jerry Denning, because I've talked about it odd times, because I think up until then you'd not seen anything. Am I right, Chris?
Yeah, I'd seen bits and bats, but nothing like that. And I know I do. Everyone that asks me about the lights, I think when people do see the lights, how we saw them. I mean, I think people have seen the lights you know, off one or two of them in the distance, and they will literally be there 1 minute and be gone the next. But what we saw that night, it affects you psychologically. I think it has I think for someone like me, it was one of those moments where you just went, now I'm sure what I believe.
Yeah.
I'm sure now, because that ain't right. And it wasn't just me. There were 7 of us, weren't there? 6 or 7 of us there. And we all did the same thing. The reaction is always the same, isn't it? It's, well, of course I believe in UFOs. Yeah, I've seen a couple of lights in the sky. This is different. This is different. God knows what that was like when you and Lee were there, and that thing, and the same for Andy Barnby when he was fishing. And they appeared probably at a similar distance, something like that, because he mentioned the size of a car.
He said the size.
I don't even know. From what I understand about people's the reaction of some people that have been in the vicinity of things like this, sometimes it can affect their health.
Yeah.
No, I mean, gladly that there wasn't anything like that for you.
Well, the Andy Barnby story, incredible. I mean, we filmed Andy for Bringing Down the Light, didn't we? And rock angler, I'll have mentioned it a few times, but not a lot, is in Thornwick Bay, is fishing for bass on his own during the night. There's nothing there. Cove's 450 foot by 700 foot. How do I know that? Because I'm sad. And that's I know that's what it is. And he's sat there, so it's 450 foot away in the darkness, and 2 huge globes of orange light light up below the cliffs, away from the cliff face. One's you can still see the cliff on one of them, and the other one's further in. So we know they're away from the cliff face. He's looking at them. He's got a GoPro camera. Don't know what good it'd have been because they're not great in low light, but he never thought to film it. And he's watching these lights, and he says he watched them for minutes and just switched off. And he thought, what odd, that was strange. I've never seen an elk quite like that before. Carried on fishing. They come on again. Now he feels uneasy, a bit apprehensive, packs his gear away. Doesn't do a runner, but packs his gear away. You've met Andy, Chris. He's real relaxed, nice guy.
Yeah.
And I can just imagine him doing that. And he left, and he climbed up the cliff face, which is not like the sheer cliffs out of the bay, and they're still there. When he got in his car, he could still see them as he's driving, and he never had no inclination to drive round the cove to look over the top to see what they were. That's a strange one in itself. But and not for Andy, for all of us, we don't follow up when we're looking at these things. You had a camera in your hand when you saw those objects. You didn't get out on film. Jerry, professional cameraman, didn't get nothing on film. I think it's just the stun. You're stunned by what you're looking at. You know, what am I seeing here? And
I think to me, there's no awareness about it as well. I think it happens too often that people can't get them on camera, because the minute you're actually gone, and I know we all say that, it's absolutely true. It really is true. And for people not interested in the phenomena, you could probably go as far as to say is that they get a better look at it.
Yeah, well,
the phenomenon knows.
Steve Ashbridge never takes a camera, and he's got some decent cameras. And half the time it'll be in his car, or he'll not have it in his hand. And when we were seeing all stuff on walls, and he probably got a better view of it than me. He's just looking at them with binoculars. He's happy to absorb it. I'm trying to capture it because I'm talking to people about it, and I want them to see there. I want them to see what we saw. Yeah. It's that difficult though. That night, I think Mark Farnell was with us, weren't he? Am I wrong?
I don't know.
I'm not. I know Lee were, but anyway, regardless. So yeah, we'll move on. So as I said earlier, myself and Les have just about wound Wolflands up, and I'll be pushing it like mad. I did a podcast last night, and I've contacted quite a few people, and I'm going to start sort of spreading the word of the documentary. But however, we're going to revive what the documentary Superliminal under a different name. So Les has got some images, and do you want to just talk about them. Les, what's first image that's up, mate?
Good question. Let's have a look.
No worries.
Right, yeah, Into the Unknown, and it's the Project Doorway with the doorway on the front cover.
Right.
Yeah, well, years ago, this is before the dreaded sea happened. We were talking about. I was talking about doing a series with various researchers in the UK, and Project Doorway with Steve. We've been working with Steve. It was something Steve was keen to look into, but Project Doorway is quite a it's quite a big project. You've got Barry over in Ireland, so Project Doorway was something we were considering. I was considering asking Steve and Barry if they wanted to do it. It would have been quite a piece of work. But this is something now that I am probably not necessarily Project Doorway, but the others images that you'll see coming up. Some of them will get made, some of them won't. But Into the Unknown it's a series of films now that I'm going to embark on with Paul over the next, when he's got time, really. And we're reviving Superliminal, which was one of the first films in that series. And Into the Unknown really it's a little bit like, I'd like to have made it as a series for something like, a bit like, Unexplained Mysteries, for example, the one on Netflix, which I think is very good. It'd be something like that. I mean, it's a math task to do a full season of this stuff. Having just done one film, the amount of time that these things can take. But I think once you get everything lined up, it's all about logistics with filmmaking. As long as the witnesses are willing, and as long as you as a researcher are willing to go the extra mile, and as long as your family is willing to let you do it, it can be done. So I think what I'm trying to say is that I think anyone who's interested in what I'm up to, and Paul and Les, I think we've got some good stuff coming. Certainly in the next 2023 is going to be, for content, is going to be very good.
I think so. Are we going to shall we run through these images then?
Yeah, go through them. Yeah, I mean, yeah.
Can the audience see imageless? Because I can't. So yeah. Oh, great. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, the lights is obviously this is Paul's bread and butter. So you go on, Paul. You talk about this one.
Well, obviously we'll be speaking to witnesses who've seen the unexplained light phenomena. Not necessarily sticking to the area of research where I am, Bempton and Flamborough and Speaton, because I think there's places in United Kingdom where this stuff's seen, and it'll mean getting out of my little bubble and going to other places as well and speaking to witnesses who've seen and experienced it, and it's not just along the coast. So yeah, there'll be something about that. Yeah, I don't know what the titles are for these things at the moment, but it might even be on that picture, but I can't see it. So
yeah, well, these were really for a deck for if we were ever going to go down the road crowdfunding, because we did discuss that at one time. Sometimes people are successful with it, other times they're not. Either way, however we do it, I think these things can be done. So our launch, the film that we actually launched this series with may well be called Into the Unknown. We don't know yet. It's got a working title. That's its working title for now. We got Mick Park helping us out, haven't we?
Yeah, that's brilliant. Well, we'd be so fortunate.
Advice and help.
We've got Mick doing music for Wolflands, and if nobody's familiar with Mick, have a look at his Park Tilton Wilson. The work that they did in the dance music. I'm not qualified to talk about it really, but in 1990s, 2000s, it's just incredible. So it's a step away from what he's normally doing, but nevertheless, they're really skillful and brilliant at what they do. And I'm fortunate that I've got a daughter who's an opera singer, so she's provided all these harmonies for us. So yeah, really lucky, and it just helps projects come together, doesn't it? We've been lucky, myself and Les. Mick's come on board. We've got Jessica on board and just some brilliant witnesses. So what's the next image, Les? Invisible Killers.
Yeah, well, that one speaks for itself, I suppose. It's the one we can't really talk about much. on YouTube these days, but it's something that Paul was looking into, and we featured briefly in Bringing Down the Light, which were the events that were happening to the livestock up there and some of the cattle all across really Yorkshire and other parts of Britain as well. And it's a subject that David Caton really has looked into quite heavily. He's probably one of the guys out there that's very knowledgeable on this subject, and I think you've covered a little bit of this in Wolflands, the Dolby Forest incident, Paul.
We have, yeah. You know, we've been fortunate that there's a guy give us a bit of some correspondence from Tony Dodd, so back in the 90s. And what's interesting is it ties in with our gamekeeper and the things he was seeing. The cryptids of the strange creatures, because back then the two never met. The gamekeeper didn't know Tony. Tony were actively researching and pursuing witnesses in Dolby Forest. Dolby Forest is only about 7 miles away from where he were operating. And when he first started working there was something killing livestock. They never got to the bottom of what it was. But what was interesting, the same something that were killing livestock was probably what Tony Dodd were pursuing in the same time frame. And yet, you know, we haven't went into too much detail, and I don't mean because we don't want to tell people, but some of it's quite graphic as well, you know. Yeah. So, it's not nice. I think that's the easiest way to put it. But you can't dress these things up in ribbons and make everything sound nice. There's a dark side to what we're looking into. And when I were up at Bempton and I were finding the livestock back in 2017 through to early 2019. And you'll find these things early in the morning, and you're the first person that's seen them, and you're looking and you realise that a fox has not predated on this and a badger has not predated on this, and you're seeing an animal that's had its face stripped of skin and its eyes removed and its ears removed. You know you're looking at something. It's really unusual, you know, and not nice. So, on that note,
Britain's alien cat I've got on the screen.
Okay. Yeah, well, this is a subject really. I don't know whether Paul and I will cover this in this series, or if we, you know, over the next few years or not. I think the big cat mystery, it's fascinating, and it's something unlike the more extravagant phenomena that we like to investigate. The big cat is a real. You know, there's tangible evidence. It's one of those things that interests me because it's a phenomena that you can come face to face with. These things are very real. They've been caught on film. And I think if you frequent the right places, and actually, you know, that coastline, the East Coastline there is one of those places amongst many, even where I am here. I'm in Bolton, in Lancashire. You know, we got sightings here. The sightings are everywhere. And I think those guys that have just made the film that featured on Blaze alongside Elusive, The Big Cat Mystery, that's a great documentary. That proves it. You know, there are guys that are specialised in researching this stuff. So whether or not we'll follow up and do our own or cat investigation, I think the guys have kind of got this covered now. They're a lot more knowledgeable than we are. They've got a lot more contacts in this field, but yeah, nonetheless, still a fascinating topic.
They are being seen a lot more frequently. You know, I've got 3 reports within probably 3 months. I don't know exact time span, just from around the old Primrose Valley caravan park at Filey, which is now defunct and it's just overgrown, and there's you know, it's a bit of a wilderness. And I got one of a puma type cat chasing a deer straight across the road in front of a car. And then less than a mile from that, there's a black cat being seen at a place called Airy Hill. That's the actual name. It's AIR. And that's right again. Primrose Valley, the disused Primrose Valley, and one of the guys put trail cams up. Never caught sight of it on a trail cam, but there's 3 reports. And what's interesting is we've got a beige one and we've got a black one. You know, but coming from same place, and once again the people don't know each other, and I've not really talked heavily about them, so I don't know if I don't think it's somebody just ringing me up to do me a favor, you know, or wanting to just have a bit of chat about cats. But let's move on to another picture. Go on, Les, please.
The Rendlesham phenomena.
Yeah, Rendlesham. It's a place I've talked about this before. With me being so busy, it's a place I've always wanted to go to, and I know you want to go there, Paul, as well.
Yeah,
And
it's an interesting place.
Yeah, a friend of ours, Derek Savery, has said he'll help us out with that, and I know you've got contacts who know a lot about Rendlesham as well, that would be willing to help us. So, and I think there's a when I talk about Rendlesham, I'm not talking about the landing, by the way. I'd be looking to look beyond that. There's more stuff going on there, going on there.
It's an MFA area. It's a multi-phenomena area, and people. I think people need to know that, and that's what needs capitalising on in any work that moving forward. Let's not forget about Rendlesham Forest incident, 1980, but
no.
Like you've just said, you're spot on. There's a lot more happening. Still
Absolutely,
happening. You know, Brenda Butler is you know, if Brenda listens to this, or you know, anybody tells her I mentioned her, you know, because I've loads of respect for Brenda. She's key, and she would be brilliant to speak to. You know, and you know, she was there. She were boots on the ground before 1980. Do you know what I mean? Then you got Derek. So you're spot on. Right, we're getting through these pictures then, Les,
British cryptids.
Ah, well.
Yeah. I mean, that speaks for itself. British cryptids is something really that, I mean, you could say elusive 2 that I'm sort of working on now very slowly, sort of covers it. But I think, you know, we've talked about, Paul and I have talked about this when we were making Superliminal. We were torn between going down this road, weren't we? About, well, do we focus on purely the cryptid angle, because you could very easily. You could. I mean, you could focus purely on the werewolf Dogman stuff if you really wanted to. There are many places that we could investigate with that, just that alone. So yeah, British cryptids is I mean, that will be as part of a series of films. One purely on the cryptids is definitely up there. It may well be the next one that I do after we finish this first one.
Okay, go on, Les. There's the Glastonbury tour on there. I don't know whether that's.
Yeah, I don't think that's loaded in. So I'll just switch to.
I can talk about it, Les. I mean, Glastonbury.
Yeah, I'll try and get it up.
I've got a really friend of mine, Jerry Denning, who knows. You know, he's from that neck of the woods. Glastonbury is an amazing, it's a fantastic place, isn't it? It's full of amazing, fantastic, weird and wonderful people anywhere. But the history of Glastonbury, again, I know I mentioned the 9-foot giant earlier, didn't I? Well, you know, this giant is talked about quite openly. This guy's just 9 foot, like that happens every day, buried in this abbey. And the whole history, the tour itself, if anyone wants to Google Glastonbury tour now and have a look put Glastonbury tour aerial views, just to look at the tour from above and try and pretend that that's a natural phenomena, it's absolutely bizarre. And there are people that Jerry knows that have been in those tunnels that all run all under the tour itself and all across from there. And obviously Glastonbury is I think Glastonbury is known. Is it the Isle of Glass? Because it used to be water, didn't it? Yeah, it used to be the tour. It all used to be covered in water. Not the tour itself, but everything else. Glastonbury itself used to be called. And then there's a history of King Arthur, isn't there? And all that. And then the fair and the giants. I mean, it's got everything, really. It's an amazing place. And the ley lines as well.
It's something I've got little knowledge of, to be honest. So, I'm guided by you. Any more, Les? I've a bit of a cold, people, which you probably picked up on. So there you go.
The Loch Ness.
Yeah, another one. Loch Ness. Obviously, it's the obvious one to go to. But a friend of mine, Andy McGrath, was going to be like the guy that was going to sort of help out with that. And when we were talking about this, it's one of those places. I mean, Paul says, he wants to get out and research a bit more, and I think people would like to see that as well. I think out of his not necessarily his comfort zone, because it's out of my comfort zone as well. You know, Loch Ness.
But yeah, out of the area, it's like Ben McDo. You know, getting
that's
to
another one.
places. Yeah, you know, that's it's got to be done. Do you know what I mean? And I hope before my legs pack up, I do it.
Yeah, well, you know, I was talking earlier about people who were asking me about, we wanted to see more live investigations. Part of this series was that they would get to see me, you, and whoever else, the team, out and about, and it was like, you know, not necessarily road trippy, but just what goes on behind the scenes. Because I think now that's what's kind of happened. What I've seen, people are very interested about what goes on behind the scenes nowadays, and you've probably seen it bleed into some of these productions you might have watched on Sky or Disney or whatever, where they'll show you bits behind. They're not so bothered about filming and hiding the cameras anymore, hiding the cables and the lights. It's all part of bringing the viewer into the experience. And you know, maybe it is the case that you go out and investigate and you find nothing, but taking the audience on that journey is what they're like. And I suppose that's probably true, because there's a lot of people, as you said, that watch this stuff and that are into the subject that can't get out there. And maybe that's something that I've missed. Yeah.
Well, you know, not for no reason other than I'll throw it at Les probably tomorrow. But what I've done today in Dane's Dyke for this little 10-second cutaway, I actually then set the camera up, pressed record, and then went and stood working on it. You know, just a little bit kind of behind the scenes kind of thing, because I think people will be surprised when they see this and they'll think it's something from an ancient cave, and it's not. Do you know? But it kind of works. There you go.
Right. Yeah, I don't know if you're ready for some more questions, you guys.
Yeah, please do. And you know, we've got
last 10 minutes. Right then. Oh, big one, biggie, from Gren Steele. It's a big one, this, Chris. Question for Chris: what is your thoughts on the pyramids?
Yeah. How long have you got? The pyramids is just it's one number. It's very similar to the temples and cities in India, for example, that were created using advanced technology. It doesn't matter whether you believe it. That's the facts. Them's the facts. You know, and when I say facts, you know, again, in my job, I've been privy to, you know, speak to many researchers. One of those researchers in regards to Egypt is a guy called Mohammed Ibrahim, and he's one of the top tour guides in Egypt. He's been doing that for over 20 years, and he's met everybody, anyone who's anyone. And the some of the stuff he can talk about, some of the stuff he can't. But I suspect in the next few years, the whole charade about Egypt and the pyramids and other places like it, I think they may well start letting a few cats out of the bag. They may do it under the guise, very similar to the UFO thing. They may do it in a very gentle way. You know, this is older than we thought, for example, which it is. You know, that kind of thing. You know, to the point where some researchers now, mainstream researchers, are now agreeing with the likes of Graham Hancock, just because he's the poster boy for this sort of stuff. There are a lot of researchers like Graham Hancock out there, doing brilliant work.
So just before,
the pyramids itself, I believe were built by, were built using advanced techniques. I don't necessarily claim that they were built by an extraterrestrial race, just that the knowledge to build them was given to them by an advanced culture.
That's what I was going to ask when I said just before. So yeah, go on, Les, please.
Yeah, maybe giants, Chris.
Look, it's possible. I think it's more likely something to do with sound technology, and look, just because of we're talking about the pyramids and places in South America being the rock being actually melted, and you can see examples of that even now. There's a lot of it's been removed from Google and YouTube, but in India and in South America, there are places where some of this rock's vitrified. you can see it's been blasted with temperatures so incredible that it isn't. It's not something we could have done with what they claim to be very primitive tools. That's all nonsense.
Yeah.
But again, I think sometimes people do it a disservice by claiming aliens did it and all the rest of it. But alien's just a word. It's just advanced technology from perhaps just a race of humanoids that were terrestrial and that's been hidden. Maybe that's who helped build it. But that knowledge has been not lost, but it's been hidden.
I've got a question from 67021, and the question is: could the Bempton lights be geostationary satellites reflecting off the sun?
Geostationary satellites? Well, I wouldn't think so. I mean, I'm not discounting what you're saying, but they're appearing in lots of different places over the sea, over the cliffs as well. We had a report 2 weeks ago. I can't think of the lad's name, but there were 7 lights out at sea, and then they switched off. And he said they're above cliffs at Bempton now, and this was in between 6 and 7 o'clock at night. But I went up the next day at 4 o'clock and stayed up while 9, and I saw them twice appear over at sea. Literally just open up on a clear night and close up. Never got them on film. I don't know. Maybe something in what you're saying, but me personally, I don't think so. They're just appearing in too many different parts of the sky. The night Chris saw them, they weren't in one place. They were all over.
I think some people might look at that as like a bit of a cheeky question. It's not.
Oh no,
it's a very reasonable and legitimate question, and it's probably because we've seen them that once you see them, and also obviously F-15s don't chase satellites and that kind of thing, and then the satellite these lights appeared on the hill behind you. But it's a reasonable question, and it's only upon seeing these things that you then realise, no, that isn't a ship in the distance. That isn't a plane. It isn't a jet. It's not an afterburner, and it's certainly not a satellite. Just because the way it presents itself and the behaviours it displays is just not in keeping with known satellites. Let's say that.
Yeah, good point. And don't forget, then, I know we're short on time, Les, but just to finish that one off, not in keeping with known satellites, going through various lifeboat logs that go back decades and decades, we're getting same descriptions then as what we're getting now.
Yeah.
Right, Les, sorry, go on.
Yes, and we're going to finish off with one last question that I've got on my tablet here from Cat in the Hat. And the question is, has Chris ever had any threats or warnings, directly or indirectly, as Paul has, regarding the info you put out? Good question.
No. And I think that's purely just because, one, I'm not that interesting. Two, I may well do. I'll be hanging around with him. But I won't be hanging around on floor, Paul, ringing him up. I'll be running off.
I think I'll be doing the same. But yeah, I'm doing a Bob. Bob, shall we run? 75. Bob.
Shall we run? Yeah. No, I haven't. No, I've had a few strange coincidences happen. Did I ever tell you about the ferry at the Isle of Wight?
No.
Yeah, I was meant to go to see David Icke, and something happened, and I ended up cancelling it. I just cancelled last minute. We meant to go. I think it was that evening. I said, no, we'll leave it. We'll leave it a couple of days. And the ferry, the ramp that goes onto the ferry collapsed, and I think some people died.
Really?
Yeah. So probably just fortunate, just looking out. I think. Yeah, very odd.
Okay, so on that note, that was my last question, guys, and I think we are at the end of the show. So if you want to,
can we just ask Chris if anybody wants to contact you?
Yeah, you can find me. Obviously, just best way to contact me is probably Facebook or the YouTube channel. Really, I'm always notifications about it. Usually abuse,
Yeah.
I'm around. No, I mean, there's some really great people and friends that support. They're now friends that support me and support Les and Paul and anyone that's watching it to listen to me. We really do appreciate your interest in what we're doing. Personally, I wish I could do a bit more and move a little bit faster, but I've only got,
There's
2
not enough
arms.
hours in the day, is there? But that's
No,
the way.
there's not. The days seem to be going so fast now. I don't know if that's just an illusion or what, but the days and time is flying, just flying.
It really is. So basically, then the website truthproof.uk. If you've got any UFO-related reports, any type of unexplained phenomena, fire it across to us. Be treated with respect, and Don Lodge will put it on. We hope in next few weeks to just make some arrangements for a kind of Christmas Truth Proof, which Don's going to host, so Les can be on panel. So I hope you can join in with that, Chris. And
yeah, that'd be good.
So we'll do that. I'll get in touch with Don this week and see where we can get started with that. But and I never normally say this because I know Sky says it and Alison, but please like and subscribe the channel. Let's keep it building. And on that note, I've just like to say thank you very much, Chris, for stepping in tonight and entertaining us for 2 hours.
You're welcome, mate. Sorry for the rambling. Anytime.
No, it's all good.
Okay, thank you, guys. And I got to thank everybody for coming onto the stream tonight. Thanks for the super chat that we received. All that welcome and grateful. Hope you all enjoyed the show. And I guess I've got to say, stay safe, and we'll see you next time. Bye.